They say God speaks through thunder and flame, but sometimes he whispers through little girls. I was no queen, no warrior, no priest. But I stood by the Nile with more faith than fear. My baby brother floated on waters that had swallowed countless others. Mama couldn't bear to watch, but I stayed. Not because I was brave, but because I couldn't let go. The reeds tickled my legs, the silence pressed on my chest. And then, a splash, a royal gasp, a cry from the basket. Pharaoh's daughter found him. She could have turned away. But something divine stirred in her. And I saw the moment when God slipped into the palace. Shall I find someone to nurse him? I asked. I didn't blink, didn't stutter. Because I knew, this wasn't chance. This was purpose, woven in secret. They called me a girl, but heaven called me a gatekeeper. I ran home not just with news, but with restoration. Mama's arms were filled again, but this time with favor. We raised Moses under threats and whispers. But every lullaby we sang was soaked in prophecy. He belonged to God long before he wore Pharaoh's robes. And as he grew, so did the ache. He left us one day, fled into the wilderness. We heard nothing for years. But my spirit never stopped listening. And when he returned, older, wilder, lit from within, with a message from the God of Abraham, I didn't hesitate, I knew. Deliverance had been waiting for the right voice. And I was ready to add mine to the chorus. Plagues shook Egypt, but we stood still. Each time Moses stretched his hand, the world shifted. But it wasn't just his hand, it was our history crying for justice. Frogs, blood, darkness, death. Still we waited, holding our breath under lintels marked with lamb's blood. Then finally, freedom. We walked out not just with gold, but with generations of silence broken. But Egypt chased us one last time. And we met the sea, terrified. Moses lifted his staff, and heaven held its breath. Water rose like walls. And dry ground sang beneath our feet. When we reached the other side, something holy exploded inside me. I didn't just see a miracle. I became part of it. That's when I took the tambourine. Yes, I brought it. I believed we'd need it. Because hope must be packed, even in flight. I struck it hard, a sound to shatter chains. And the women came, feet blistered, hearts blazing. We danced, not as refugees, but as daughters redeemed. Our voices rang like battle cries turned lullabies. Moses had parted the sea, but I led the praise. I wasn't behind, I was beside. Not an afterthought, but a rhythm woven into the story. And God didn't hush me. He let me sing. He let us dance. Because deliverance deserves celebration. And even deserts echo with joy when women lead. But the wilderness didn't dance back. Sand doesn't sing, it tests. We grew hungry, thirsty, restless. Miracles rained down, yet complaints rose faster. Still, I gathered the women. We told stories under starlight, braided hope into one another's hair. Sometimes faith isn't parting seas, it's making dinner when there's only manna. I reminded them who we were, no longer slaves. Our hands remembered Egypt, but our hearts had to forget. Still, even as I served, something in me ached. Why did they only follow Moses? Didn't I walk the same fire? Didn't I lead the praise, lift the broken, keep the rhythm alive? In silence, I wrestled with worth. Not before God, but before men. And one day, my silence cracked. I asked what others whispered. Why Moses alone? Didn't God speak through Aaron and me, too? It wasn't rebellion, it was longing. To be seen as more than background. But heaven doesn't always respond gently. Leprosy bloomed on my skin like a white fire. I was cast out, away from the camp, away from songs. Alone, I sat in the wilderness, no tambourine, no voice. Each breath stung, each thought echoed shame. But then, Moses prayed. And the people waited. They didn't move without me. Even stained, I mattered. That, too, was mercy. After 7 days, I returned. Not just healed, but humbled. God didn't reject me, He refined me. I sang again, but with softer hands. Because leadership that hasn't been broken is dangerous. Now I saw the women differently. not just as followers, but as flames. I taught them not just songs, but surrender. That it's okay to ask questions, but better to wait for God's answer. And I carried my tambourine again. Not as proof of praise, but as testimony. You can worship even with a scar. Even shame, surrendered, becomes sacred. And the wilderness became our altar. Time passed like sand through fingers. We buried fathers, mothers, dreamers. And still, the cloud moved, and we followed. I watched Moses grow wearier. Aaron's beard grey with time. And I saw new daughters rise. Girls who had never seen Egypt, yet carried its shadows. I told them stories, not for nostalgia, but for nourishment. They needed to know where we came from, so they could understand where we were going. And I reminded them that songs were swords. That even in silence, God listens. That even in dust, God dwells. We were nomads, but never forgotten. I knew I wouldn't reach the promised land. But somehow, that felt okay. My feet had already touched too many miracles. The Nile, the sea, the desert, all of them held pieces of me. My name, Miriam, means bitterness, but also strength. And somewhere between the two, I lived. Not always praised, but always present. Not always loud, but never lost. I wasn't perfect, but I was part of the plan. And sometimes, that's more sacred than being center stage. God doesn't waste women who wait. Or silence that sings. He gathers it all. So if you've ever felt overlooked, if your tambourine feels forgotten, packed away in pain, know this. God sees the rhythm you carry. He hears your quiet faith, your unsung obedience. You don't need a crown to be royal in His eyes. You don't need a spotlight to shape legacy. Sometimes the greatest leaders are those who sing after the storm. Like Miriam. So hold your rhythm. Even in the waiting. Even in the wilderness. Because He's not done with your melody. Not yet. The desert was long, and sometimes dry faith feels heavier than dry land. But I learned that praise doesn't require proof. Sometimes worship is remembering instead of seeing. I remembered the Nile, the basket, the Pharaoh's daughter's gaze. I remembered the women dancing. And I remembered God's faithfulness when nothing around us made sense. So I kept teaching the younger ones to sing. Even when their mouths were dry. I taught them to bring their tambourines, even if they didn't feel like it. Because the soul needs rhythm when the days blur into dust. We don't worship only because we feel joy. We worship because God is still good. Even when we're tired. Even when we're unsure. Even when we're not yet home. There were days I watched Moses climb the mountain. Days I watched Aaron enter the tent of meeting. But my meeting place was among women. Tending fires, crushing grain, braiding hope into baskets. Some would call that ordinary. But heaven saw ministry. And I learned that not every prophet stands on a mountain. Some kneel beside the sick, whisper truth into waiting hearts. Some walk among the tents with salt and honey and holy words. I was never given tablets of stone. But I was given voices to shape. And that, too, is sacred. My pulpit was woven from patience. My praise born from pain. And God was in it all. One night, I sat by a dying woman. Her daughter sobbed, thinking God had forgotten them. I held her hand and sang, just softly, a melody from the sea. A song about deliverance. And in that flickering silence, something broke open. Because songs remember what words forget. And even grief kneels when truth is sung. I told the girl that her mother's story would not be erased. That heaven catches tears and stores them. That God never loses track of those who suffer in shadows. And when the woman passed, it wasn't with fear. It was with a whisper of worship on her lips. I realized then that legacy isn't what we leave behind. It's what we awaken in others. Sometimes I wonder how people will remember me. The first prophetess. The sister of Moses. The one who danced with a tambourine in the sand. But what matters most isn't the memory, it's the impact. If they forget my name but still sing the song, that's enough. If women in the future lift their voices because I once did, that's joy. Because I didn't sing for applause. I sang for the one who split seas. I didn't lead to be followed. I led so others could find their own rhythm with God. It was never about me. It was about Him. Always. Even when no one clapped. They say I died in Kadesh. Not in Jerusalem, not in Canaan. Not in the land of milk and honey. But maybe that's fitting. Because my whole life was lived between places. Between Egypt and freedom. Between silence and song. Between bitter and beloved. And that's where God met me. Not at the end, but in the in-between. He shaped me in the shadows. And crowned me with songs. No throne. No robe. Just a tambourine. And a legacy that still echoes. If you feel like your obedience is small. If you think your voice gets lost in louder rooms. Let me remind you. God hears in whispers. He sees the women no one applauds. He remembers the midwives, the mothers, the mourners. He calls the overlooked, anoints the uninvited. And He writes His promises through tambourines as much as through tablets. You don't need to be center stage. Just willing. Just present. Just faithful. Like Miriam. You can change history. Even from the shadows. I often think of the sea. Not just because it parted, but because it listened. It obeyed the voice of God through the hand of a man. But it held the memory of a woman's praise. Waves remember worship. And I believe every step we took on dry ground was sealed by praise. Don't underestimate your hallelujah. It may carry generations behind it. The girls I taught became mothers who taught others. And now, somewhere in eternity, I still hear their singing. It's not just music, it's movement. And when you raise your voice, you join a river of praise that began long before you. And will continue long after. I wasn't a queen, but I carried royalty. Not the kind made of gold, but of glory. I wore no crown, but my obedience was precious. My faith wasn't loud, it was lasting. And if you ever feel small, remember this, I was a slave's daughter. Raised in a nation that wanted to erase me. And still, God wrote me into the story. He used my watching eyes, my brave words, my aching hands. He used my voice. And He can use yours. Don't wait for recognition. He already knows your name. And that's enough. To every woman who stands in silence. To every girl holding the weight of generations in her chest. To every mother singing over sons she fears she might lose. You are not forgotten. Heaven sees. And when the time is right, the sea will part for you, too. Keep watching. Keep singing. Keep believing. The tambourine still belongs in your hands. And your story, yes, your story, still matters. You don't need a temple to touch the holy. You just need trust. And a heart open to rhythm. Because deliverance is still dancing.
If Miriam's story found you in your quiet place, let it remind you that no voice offered to God is ever wasted. Leave a comment with a moment you praise through pain. And if these stories bring light to your shadows, subscribe to Biblical Stories for more sacred echoes. Because even in the margins, miracles unfold. And your voice, like Miriam's, was made to be heard.